The elevator dinged, and I stepped onto the floor I'd spent months preparing for, my laptop bag swinging against my side. I barely had time to set it down before she appeared, the CEO's daughter, late 20s, designer heels clicking against marble, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She didn't greet me. She didn't ask questions. She just pointed at me like I was a stain she wanted to erase. "You're fired," she said, as casually as if she were cancelling a lunch reservation. My $127,000 bonus, fully earned and approved, vanished in that moment. The $285 million deal we'd been on the edge of closing, now teetering because of her impulsive decision. Security guards hovered, awkward and unsure if they should intervene, while my colleagues froze mid-keystroke, eyes darting between us, silently witnessing my professional life unravel in 90 seconds. My briefcase sat unopened on the desk, the contracts inside now worthless unless I could somehow reclaim control. I didn't move immediately. I just looked at her, heart pounding, not from fear, but from a slow, deliberate anger. This wasn't over. Far from it. 3 months earlier, I'd been handpicked to lead the $285 million deal, a transaction that could redefine the company's trajectory. Every late night, every spreadsheet, every client call had been for this moment. I'd earned trust the hard way, proving my expertise, navigating bureaucratic red tape, and building relationships with partners who had once doubted me. The CEO had relied on me, not just for numbers, but for judgment. Meanwhile, the daughter had floated around the office like an untested heir, observing but never participating in the high-stakes decisions. She was entitled, yes, but also dangerously impulsive. People whispered about her whims, her tendency to override decisions without understanding consequences. No one expected the deal to succeed under her interference, yet she had the audacity to insert herself at the climax, ignoring months of work that hung by a thread. From my perspective, the groundwork had been laid meticulously, client contracts renegotiated, compliance checks finalized, contingency plans drafted. Every risk had been accounted for, and yet in an instant all of that could be undone, not by failure, but by the reckless confidence of someone who thought position mattered more than preparation. I realized almost immediately that survival wouldn't be about emotion, it would be about strategy. I left the office without a word, my briefcase heavy in my hand. Though the weight wasn't just physical, the hallways seemed longer, the fluorescent lights harsher. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a cocktail of disbelief and rage that radiated outward in slow, deliberate pulses. Every step felt like a countdown. Tick, 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 before the full consequences of her impulsive decision would hit the company. How could someone so reckless be allowed to wield authority? How could months of preparation, client trust, and financial maneuvering be jeopardized by a whim? And then the thought struck me, maybe this wasn't just a setback. Maybe this was leverage. There were agreements, clauses, contingencies, and insights she hadn't bothered to check, details that could flip the narrative entirely. I let the anger simmer, refusing to react, letting it sharpen instead of consume me. The daughter had assumed power. She had no idea whose terrain she had stepped onto. My mind raced through scenarios, contingencies, and sequences of actions. Reacting impulsively could ruin everything. But patience, calculation, and quiet authority, those were weapons she had never learned to respect. And that gave me an edge she would soon regret. As I sat in my car, the pieces began to fall into place. Months of meticulous work had left me with more than just preparation. I had leverage the daughter couldn't even imagine. Contractual clauses protected the deal against unilateral decisions, financial contingencies, ensured that critical milestones couldn't be derailed without notice. Client commitments, carefully negotiated over weeks, were legally binding. I realized she had wielded authority without understanding the boundaries, assuming that position equaled control. But in reality, the power was in the details she had ignored. I spent the next few hours reviewing every document, every email, every spreadsheet, tracing the network of dependencies I had created. My plan crystallized: patience first, confrontation second. Any impulsive reaction now could destroy the very leverage I'd cultivated. Instead, I would let her act, let her take credit for chaos she had not orchestrated, and quietly prepare to reclaim control in a way that was undeniable, documented and irreversible. Every contingency had a counter. Every move she made would be anticipated, and every misstep would serve as proof of incompetence. By the time I stepped back into the office, it would be on my terms. Calmly, methodically, I began drafting emails, making discreet calls to key contacts, and preparing legal documentation. The daughter had assumed power. She had no idea whose chessboard she had entered, and for the first time I smiled, not out of triumph, but because the game had just begun, and I held all the pieces. The next 3 days unfolded like a calculated storm. I didn't rush back to the office immediately. Instead, I monitored every move the daughter made from a careful distance. Each email she sent, every meeting she convened, revealed not competence but impulsiveness. She was already taking credit for decisions she didn't understand, making promises she couldn't keep, and even hinting at changes that risked the $285 million deal. Meanwhile, I quietly reached out to clients, reaffirming commitments, clarifying contingencies, and subtly reminding them of the binding clauses she was overlooking. I worked with lawyers to ensure every legal avenue was airtight, every document irrefutable. By day 2, the tension within the office was palpable. Colleagues whispered, unsure who actually controlled the situation. The daughter began to realize that her impulsive firing and unilateral actions had not gone unnoticed, and that she had miscalculated the consequences. On day 3, I moved decisively. I presented meticulously documented evidence to the board and senior leadership, calmly outlining the chain of events, the risks she had introduced, and the protections that ensured the deal's survival only under my oversight. The room, previously tense with uncertainty, shifted as the facts became undeniable. The daughter's confidence faltered. For the first time, everyone could see that authority without preparation was meaningless. My patience, preparation, and precise execution had transformed what looked like disaster into control. I hadn't just survived the firing, I had orchestrated a comeback that would leave no doubt who truly held power. By the end of day 3, the chaos had transformed into clarity. The $285 million deal, once teetering on the edge of collapse, was stabilized. Contracts were intact, client commitments reaffirmed, and every contingency properly secured. The $127,000 bonus, once in jeopardy, was reinstated, a quiet but undeniable validation of the work I had done. The daughter, once brimming with unearned confidence, sat stunned as the board reviewed the documentation I had presented. Her impulsive decisions were exposed, not as malice, but as ignorance of the systems she had been given. She retained her title, but the authority she had flaunted evaporated. Colleagues who had witnessed the firing and the fallout breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had seen what true competence looked like, and it wasn't entitlement or a family name. For the first time since that shocking moment in the office, I felt the weight lift, not from vindictiveness, but from restoring order, stability, and respect for the rules that actually govern results. Calm had won over chaos. Patience had triumphed over impulsiveness. And while the daughter would need to rebuild credibility, the company and its people would continue without disruption, under leadership that valued preparation, skill, and foresight above all else. This story isn't just about a bonus, a billion-dollar deal, or even being fired by someone who thought position outweighed preparation. It's about understanding the difference between perceived power and actual leverage. The CEO's daughter believed authority came from a title, a name, or a momentary whim. But real influence comes from preparation, insight, and the patience to act at the right time. Most people react when they're wronged. Few take the time to analyze, document, and execute with precision. That distinction determines whether you collapse under humiliation or turn it into an opportunity. In any professional or personal scenario, the same principles apply. Know your value, understand your position, document everything, and never let impulsive authority dictate your trajectory. Patience amplifies power. Preparation transforms leverage into results, and watching someone overestimate their authority only reinforces what's already true. Entitlement collapses when confronted by competence. The question isn't whether someone can fire you, it's whether they understand the consequences of underestimating you. Control doesn't come from anger or retaliation. It comes from clarity, strategy, and the courage to let people reveal themselves before you respond.